what we're doing right now is we're doing this series called More Than More. And we're taking a specific, deliberate look at the miracles that Jesus performed. And not just the miracles, but these times in Jesus' ministry where there was just an overload, a more than more moment. And last week, we talked about there's a miracle in John chapter 2 when Jesus turned a bunch of water into wine. And we hear that and we think, okay, so what's a bunch? And so last week what we did is I got 5-gallon buckets and I lined them up all across the stage because it's 24 5-gallon buckets of wine that Jesus created. It was that is a lot of wine. And we were trying to just get a scope and what we can learn from that. And so today, what we're going to look at, the title of the message is Jesus Can. And what we're going to look at is John chapter 6, verses 5 through 15. Now, this is the only miracle recorded in the Gospels. Now, I have to be careful when I preach sometimes. I had a physics professor once tell me, he said, Christian, or he said, Christian, he was saying to the whole class, when you guys are writing something down, when you're trying to prove something to me, you're not allowed to take for granted anything. You have to assume that the only thing I know is the number 7. Now, explain to me why the following is true. So, when I say the Gospels, what I'm talking about, so the Bible is divided in the two main sections. You have the Old Testament and the New Testament. And an easy way to understand them is the Old Testament is all about a promise of a Savior, somebody that's going to come and save the Jewish people and really all mankind, although the promise was given to Jewish people. So up to the most of throughout history, the Jewish people have said the Savior's coming to save the Jewish people. But it even says in the Old Testament that it's going to be the Savior for all mankind. That's the Old Testament. The New Testament is like the fulfillment of that promise. And that Savior of all mankind is this guy, Jesus. Now, the New Testament is all about Jesus, all about his church, but it really comes back to Jesus. But the actual biography, the actual stories of Jesus and his earthly ministry, those are called the Gospels. And we have 4 of them. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And now those 4 Gospels, this is the only miracle that is recorded in all 4 Gospels. So it has to be important if all 4 of these guys thought it important enough to write down. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, those are what we call the synoptic Gospels. If you read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you're going to be really confused because you're going to be thinking the whole time, I thought I just read that. Because Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar to each other. So they're in synchronicity or synoptic. That's where that S-Y-N comes from. And then the book of John is not a synoptic. It has a different scope. John has he comes at it from a different point of view than Matthew, Mark, and Luke do. But I'm going to use John's telling of the gospel. I'll relate back to Matthew as well. But in this story, what happens is Jesus, he withdraws, he goes away, and Jesus did this a lot. Jesus liked to get his alone time. And there's a lot of debate about was Jesus getting his alone time because he had found out that his cousin, John the Baptist, had been killed, actually beheaded. It was an awful thing. And that's kind of what Matthew records. Or was Jesus going away to teach his disciples? Or was Jesus trying to get away from the crowd? What matters is that Jesus was trying to get some alone time with his disciples. And so he goes out into this says, the wilderness. This is not the wilderness. He just went out in the country. That's all he did. He goes out on these grassy hills with his disciples. And at this point in Jesus' story, in Jesus' life, people have been hearing about this guy who keeps doing some pretty crazy things. Like if somebody has a limb that is shriveled and impaired, Jesus is stretching it out and restoring them. If there's been people who have died that Jesus has brought back to life, and people keep hearing about Jesus, and not only is he doing these amazing things, but he's teaching something different. He's teaching something new. He's teaching about grace. He's teaching about forgiveness. He's teaching about this new kingdom of God. And so you have this very dynamic, compelling message that is being backed up by these very dynamic and compelling miracles. And so people want to see this Jesus. And that's what happens. People find out where Jesus is and they just start, coming in droves to hear him. And that's where our story is going to pick up in John chapter 6. Jesus soon saw, he's out in the wilderness with his disciples, he soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. And turning to Philip, that's one of his disciples, one of these guys following Jesus, he asked, "Where can we buy bread to feed all these people?" Now, he was testing Philip because he already knew what he was going to do. And Philip replied, "Even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money." Now, and you may be following along with me in a different Bible right now, and if you are, that's fine. The actual translation is, even if we had 200 denarii. A denarius was 1 day's wage. So 200, 6 days a week, works out to about 8 months, which is why he said worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them. Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, another one of the disciples, spoke up. "There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that with this huge crowd?" Now, 5 barley loaves. Now, I think what was happening here, this is not in the Bible. I'm just kind of trying to fill in the blanks. I think what happened, because I've seen kids do this. In fact, I remember doing this as a kid too, and I'm sure you've seen it too, and hopefully it happens. But I think what happened is Jesus turns to Philip and goes, "Philip, look at all these people." A little bit, probably about 20 times the amount of people are in this room right now. He says, "Philip, how are we going to feed all these people?" And Philip goes, feed all these people? We just came out for some one-on-one time with you, Jesus. Even if we've been saving up our money for months, we couldn't feed all these people." And then this little boy, who for whatever reason was with him, maybe he was, a 10-year-old, a 14-year-old, this young boy, he nudges one of the disciples and he says, "Hey, I've got food." Now, I can see a child doing that. And we would look at that child and we'd pat him on the head and say, "That's so cute. You've got food. You've got your 5 little loaves of bread and your 2 little fish that you're going to smear on the bread and you're going to eat on the side. It was probably pickled fish is what it was. Blech. Blech. But you're Jesus, this little boy here, he's got food. But seriously, what is that going to do for this huge crowd?" Well, you got to remember who you're talking to. Jesus says, "Tell everyone to sit down." So the disciples, 12 of them, they go to these crowds and they start telling everybody, hey, guys, get in groups, sit down. And they sit. We know from the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they were sitting in groups of 50 to 100. And they sit down on these grassy slopes. And the men alone, and we know we're not numbering everybody because the Bible gives specific reference to a separate number. In the book of Matthew, it says that the men numbered 5,000. This wasn't including women and children. So we know that there was 5,000 men, and there had to be a lot more people, maybe 10,000, maybe 15,000. Then Jesus took the loaves, and he gave thanks to God, and he distributed them to the people. Afterward, he did the same with the fish. And then they all ate as much as they wanted. So they all ate till they were full. After everyone was full, Jesus told his disciples, "Now gather the leftovers so that nothing was wasted." All right, now let's finish off. So they picked up the pieces, and they filled 12 baskets with scraps left by the people who had eaten the 5 barley loaves. So the baskets, the word, we know from the Greek word that the basket was probably about the size of a laundry basket, maybe a little bit smaller. So they're big baskets. And they are all filled, 12 of them, with scraps. Now, that's an important detail. Why is that an important detail? Because it tells us what the miracle was. Exactly. Now, I'm going to go nerd real quick. Not math nerd. I'm going to go fantasy nerd. I know that's not fantasy football. Nope. Show of hands. I'm going to see who my nerds are. Who knows what lembas bread is? Yes. All 5 of us. That's great. Lembas bread is from the world of Lord of the Rings. And it's this magic elven bread where one small bite can feed a man for a whole day. So that's lembas bread. This wasn't a lembas bread miracle. People didn't take a tiny little morsel of bread. Jesus didn't stretch these 5 little barley loaves so that everybody got a tiny little morsel and that tiny little morsel filled them up. That's not the miracle. We know Jesus multiplied the bread. Why do we know Jesus multiplied the bread? Because Jesus started breaking it. Jesus started distributing it. Everybody ate until they were full. And then there were 12 basketfuls left over. So there was more than what they started with. That tells us what the miracle was. All right? So when the people saw him do this miracle, because they saw Jesus breaking the bread, and then they saw, well, all these 12 basketfuls are here when they weren't here before, They said, surely he is the prophet we have been expecting. Now that the prophet we have been expecting. Back in Deuteronomy, which is in the Old Testament, remember I said the Old Testament is the promise made. There is a promise about a prophet that's going to come like Moses. And if you know the story of Moses, if you don't know the story of Moses, just go watch Charlton Heston's 10 Commandments. You'll get a really good idea of the story of Moses. The story of Moses, one of the things that Moses did when he was wandering in the wilderness with the people of Israel, with the Jewish people, is they started getting hungry and they started grumbling and complaining. Well, why are we here? We should have been back in as slaves. We were better off as slaves. And Moses is like, you people are crazy. But one of the things that Moses does is he prays to God, and God says, I'm going to make bread for you. And then in the mornings, there was like this stuff on the ground called manna, and it was like grain. It was like flour, and they would scoop it up, and they'd make these little cakes out of it. And so when they see Jesus making bread out of nothing, they liken him to the prophet, the one that the promise made. And when Jesus saw that they were ready to force him to be their king, they wanted somebody to overthrow the Roman powers. They wanted a new king of Israel. And while Jesus is the king of Israel, Jesus is the king of kings. He wasn't about being a political leader. He was about being the leader. And so he avoided the political bent to what these people were trying to do. So he slipped away into the hills by himself. So when I go through this and I look at this passage, there's like a really good sermon that I wanted to preach, and I had these points ready to go. Like I'll show them to you. One is natural wisdom plus supernatural power. If you think about that, where's the natural wisdom? Jesus saw the crowd and he told them to sit down in groups. Why did he do that? Then there's no rush on food. People have a place to wait patiently for the food. It was natural wisdom. It was just a smart thing to do. But then Jesus combines that natural wisdom with supernatural power. I think that's how the church should work. I think we should be organized. I think we should be structured. I think we should show good natural wisdom. And I think we should trust in the supernatural power of God and watch it work. So I thought, that'd be a really good sermon point. And then we could also talk about Jesus' compassion. Because Jesus wanted to be alone. He wanted to be by himself with his disciples. And yet the crowds kept coming to him because they wanted to see him do something cool. And what does he do? He looks at the crowds and he has compassion on us, what the Gospels tell us. He has compassion in his heart for all of these people. So it's a story of Jesus' compassion. It's also a story of Jesus wanting to include his disciples. That's an important point. Notice, Jesus was trying to involve and include Philip. He doesn't just get to work. He talks to Philip first and he says, Philip, how are we going to feed all these people? Now, this is John chapter 6. John chapter 2 is when Jesus turned the water into wine. So these guys, and Philip was one of those original disciples that saw him do it. Why didn't he believe that Jesus could feed all these people? But he doubts and he says, I don't have enough money for all of this. Andrew, same thing. Here's a little, but he doubts. How is this going to feed everybody? Do you guys not remember the 120 gallons of wine? Pretty sure Jesus can handle this. But they forget it. So Jesus includes his disciples at the beginning, and then he puts them to work, and they start putting the people in groups of 50, and then they start distributing the bread, and then they start picking up the bread. He included his disciples in the miracle. All of these are great points that we could preach on, that we could look at. But really, the one thing that I want to focus on is simply this. Jesus can do it. Jesus can do it. Jesus can do it. Now, I've got this illustration that I've done before, and I was really nervous. Honestly, I was nervous about doing it again just because the last time I did this was 10 years ago at this church, and people liked it, this illustration that I'm about to do. And because people liked it, now I have this high expectation, the hype. You better live up to the last time you did it, right? So I made some changes to it. And what I'm going to do, if we're going to talk about Jesus can do it, what does that mean? So what I did is I went online, I started doing research, I started calling bakeries, all kinds of stuff, started going crazy. It was actually a lot of fun. And what I did is I found, let me tell you, sir, there's a great bakery. I've never been there, I've never tried their food, so I don't actually know if they're a great bakery. I just don't want to say that from the stage. There's a great bakery in Fairfax called Fairfax Bakery, and I found them online. And it says American Mediterranean cuisine. I'm like, oh, perfect, because this is the Mediterranean. So I'm like, maybe they've got barley loaves. So I call up a bakery. Hey, do you guys have any, I know this is kind of a weird question. I'm doing a sermon. I'm at a pastor at church. Do you guys have any barley loaves or any barley bread? Oh, no, we don't have bread. Really? Yeah, we don't have bread here. Okay, you'll have to forgive me because I read the word bakery. I'm pretty sure bread is like the staple of all bakeries, right? What does a baker make? Bread. Now, I know that they do cakes and cookies and everything else, but bread is like, that's what bakers do. And I was actually just in a meeting right before you called about getting bread here. I'm like, you probably should have started with that as a bakery. I called all over Northern Virginia. I was calling halal markets. I was calling Mediterranean restaurants. Nobody has barley bread. Nobody. Now, I'd probably go to maybe a pub because it's also an English thing, but I could not find barley bread. So then I started looking for barley flour because I thought, you know what, if I can't find barley bread, I'm going to make it. So then I started looking for barley flour. I went to Walmart, I went to Giant, I went to Wegmans, I went to Whole Foods. Nobody's got barley flour. Nobody. I found some online. Probably could have done that. So anyway, I mean, they've got like a garbanzo bean flour. They've got almond flour. They've got hazelnut flour. No barley flour. I found this stuff right here. Spelt flour. Whole grain, stone ground, which would have been what Jesus had. Spelt flour. And it says right here on the package, a grain from antiquity. Antiquity means ancient. So it's like, all right. So okay. So I did what any normal person would do when they're standing in front of the wall of flour at Wegmans. Pull out my phone and I start Googling, what is spelt flour? And I found this thing, this write-up on it says, if you run out of spelt flour, barley flour will make a good substitute. And I was like, well, great, give me the barley flour. But I couldn't find it. So, long story longer, I found a recipe online that a lot of ingredients. I found an Alton Brown recipe. If you don't know who Alton Brown is, he's like one of my favorite celebrity chefs. He's awesome. Anyway, found an Alton Brown recipe, but his recipe had milk and eggs in it. And I'm pretty sure in Jesus' day, a lot of the bread that they would have used would not have had milk and eggs in it just because those were expensive. And barley literally was the cheap grain. It was the poor man's grain. It's probably why these restaurants aren't selling it, right? So I find this recipe that just has barley flour, baking powder, I'll talk about that in a minute, salt, olive oil, and water. It's really, really simple. Now, I know Jesus probably didn't have baking powder, but I also read that what a common thing to do is they would bake bread in the home, and they would take the dough, and they'd pinch some off, and they would use that as starter leaven for the next batch of bread, and they would just keep doing that. Friendship bread, some people call it, right? And so that's how, so it would have had a little bit of leaven, so I'm substituting that in for the baking powder, so there you go. Ba-bam! Got a barley loaf right here. Hooray! Okay, so was this what that little boy had? Did that little boy have 5 of these suckers? I made it at my house and let my wife try it. She goes, it was probably better in Jesus' day. After doing some more research, reading some books and stuff, I found out that a common person would have about a pint of grain allotted to them every day. A pint is about 2.5 cups. So I changed this recipe to be about 2.5 cups of bread. So it would be about 2.5 of these things would be a whole day's worth of food for the common person in Jesus' day. So when we read the text and we read that it would have been everybody ate their fill, everybody ate until they were full, it's entirely likely that 2.5 of these things is about right. So then I did more math, and I put these numbers into an online calculator. And so if I follow that recipe using a pint of grain and then changing all of the other ratios, it comes out to about 0.66 kilograms a day. A little more than a pound of food would have been a daily allotment. And a lot of people only had one meal a day. So when the Bible says that they ate food until they were full, I tried to be a really exact and really precise on how much that would actually be. Now, why did I do that? This is where it gets weird. I'm sorry. This is my apology. Things are about to get you, Christian. That you just talked a whole lot about why it's 0.66 kilograms of bread, and honestly, I don't care. I know. I get that. I do. Now, let me explain why I do. And hopefully all of this will come together and you'll see why this is such an important thing. My background in this world is I loved math growing up as a kid. I loved it. Like, I really loved it. I can tell you moments where I solved problems growing up. I can tell you moments of struggle. I remember in second grade when we were talking about subtraction and you had to carry the one or borrow. Everybody know what I'm talking about? And I could not understand it. I just couldn't. And I remember the teacher saying, raise your hand if you don't understand it. Her name was Mrs. Anderson. Marty Anderson was her name. See, I'm telling you, I remember these moments. And I remember raising my hand and being the only kid in the class. I felt like such a moron. And I remember her putting practice problems up on the board and Marty Anderson coming down and working with me until I understood how to borrow doing subtraction. I remember doing a map for how to make a soccer ball in 6th grade, how to cut it out and fold it up and make a soccer ball. The whole point was 3-dimensional and 2-dimensional planes. I remember doing that. I remember repeating algebra from 8th to 9th grade. I remember Calculus 2 in college. Calculus 2, I started in Calculus 2, and I remember it being stupid easy because I had a really good calculus teacher in high school. I remember taking complex analysis as an elective in college because I love math so much. I ended up getting a bachelor's degree in math. I went and worked for the government at Los Alamos National Laboratories as a graduate research assistant. In math, I ended up getting a master's degree in math. And the whole reason I did all of that work in mathematics was so I could meet my amazingly beautiful wife. And she went on to be a mathematician in the government, and I went on to become a youth pastor. Totally worth it. Totally worth it. So that's my background. I had a minor in physics, which sounds a lot more impressive than it is. It really wasn't. It was just a few classes in physics. I also enjoyed physics, but math was really where I was happy. In physics, and I'm going to do some math here in a minute, there's this thing that everybody's heard of. Even if you hate math, you hate science, you hate physics, you hate it all, do you still know this equation? It's the most famous equation of all time. E equals, anybody? Here it is. Thank you very much. MC squared. That's right. Now, everybody knows that a lot of people don't know what it means, and that's okay. Physics, for a long time, this guy named Isaac Newton, a Christian man, good man, brilliant man, he came up with this whole idea of physics, and it's called classical Newtonian mechanics. All of those are different synonymous words for Einstein or for Newtonian physics. But the thing with Newtonian physics is they're actually kind of an approximation. They don't work when things get really small and when things get really fast. A couple hundred years later, Einstein shows up on the scene, and Einstein starts thinking of physics in a completely new way. We call it modern physics or Einsteinian physics or quantum physics. He did the same things that Newton did, but from a completely different point of view. And the way Einstein's physics worked, it worked for everything, even the tiny things and the super fast things. This is one of the biggest contributions that Einstein made to the world of physics. It's called the theory of relativity. And the reason it's such a big contribution is back in Newton's day, Newton, we have this going all the way back to the Greeks, but Newton, he helped understanding the law of conservation of mass, which says that there's nothing created, there's no mass that can be created nor destroyed. It can only be changed by chemical reaction. Now you may be, Christian, I can destroy something. How? Tell me how you know. I can burn it. Okay, then what do you do with the ash? Because it was a chemical reaction and the ash, you just changed it, but it's still there. Well, I see, no matter what you do, there's always going to be something there. So that was the law of conservation of mass. Einstein came on the scene, and we also had the law of conservation of energy. And that says, same thing. Energy can be neither created nor destroyed, only changed. And Einstein comes on the scene, and what Einstein did that was so brilliant, that's really changed the world, is he found a way to show and prove that energy and mass are actually the same thing. They can be equated to one another. energy and mass. So within your mass, think of it as weight. How much you weigh, there's a lot of energy. This is the principle. This is why atomic and nuclear bombs work. What we did with the atomic bomb is we found a way to let the energy out of a mass. And the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki, the Fat Man bomb, it was plutonium. Plutonium was the mass inside the bomb. We found a way to let the energy out of that mass, of that matter. And when we let the energy out, it was a lot of energy. But it's because energy and mass are really the same thing. They can be equated. Now that c, that is the speed of light constant, which is 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. That's very, very fast. It's 186,000 miles per second. It's 7.5 times around the world in 1 second. It's stupid fast. It's really, really fast. You can't go any faster than that, according to Einstein. And I'm not going to get into why you can't. So all of the cool Star Trek stuff where they go faster than light and warp speed, things get really, really tricky when you start talking about that. So why are you putting this up there? What does this have to do with bread? With barley bread that is poor man's bread, right? Well, I'm glad you asked. Thank you. Okay. What I want to do is let's look at what Jesus did here. So if we have a piece of barley bread, which it's pretty good, I was going to say. Yeah, it is. All right. And let's say that these guys ate their fill and it was their whole day's worth, so it would be about approximately 0.66 kilograms of bread, okay? So if we take that amount that each of these people ate, and we take the fact that the speed of light is 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, what we can find is the amount of energy that Jesus used in that miracle. So the amount of energy would be equal to the amount of bread. So there was 0.66 kilograms per piece of bread, right? And that was times 5,000. Hope this marker doesn't die on me. Pieces of, or loaves of bread, however much, just bread, right? Okay? So that's the M part. There's our M right there. That's the total mass. Now we've got to plug in the speed of light, which is 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, and all of that squared. So that's the energy, right? So we do our, I'm real big on units, making sure you carry your units. A lot of people, it's just a little side note, you can take this for free. This has nothing to do with preaching or anything. If you ever do physics or science, always keep your units. It'll help you make sure you did the problem right. There you go. Now, if I just lost all of you, it's tough. Okay? So if we do our units here, the breads cancel, and what we're left with is the amount of energy that Jesus used here. So we have energy is equal to, I think it was 2.97, right? Yeah. 2.97 times 10 to the 20th. That's a big dadgum number. Kilograms, we've got kilograms right there, times meters squared per second squared. Now, I'll explain all of this in a minute. You read that and you think, oh, what is that? So 2.97 times 10 to the 20th. That's 2 followed by 20. So 297 and then 18 more zeros on the end of that. That is a big number. Big number. There's a lot faster to write it this way than all those 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 20 times, right? So when you look at this and you think, Christian, what the heck is a kilogram meter squared per second squared? We have a name for that. We do. We call them a joule. Now, all my science people in the room, all my super nerds, maybe some of them that knew what lambus bread was, you're really happy that I'm going to write joule instead of kilogram meter squared per second squared, or J is what we write. Okay? So what Jesus did in this miracle was he showed, or he used, or he had to manipulate, or he had to control 2.97 times 10 to the 20th joules of energy. Now, a lot of you are sitting there going, gosh, this is boring. This is the worst sermon I've ever heard in my life. Okay, I know, I'm sorry. Right? That's a lot of energy. And we hear that and we think, okay, that's a lot of energy. How much? So what? No, it's a lot of energy. Let me prove it to you. Oh gosh, he's going back to the board. Okay. Let's talk about the bomb. I already referenced it once. The bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki, Japan. The bomb that ended World War II. The first one was Little Boy, dropped in Hiroshima. That's the Fat Man bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. When Fat Man bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, it was approximately 21, they call this the yield, kilotons of energy, of explosive energy. What's a kiloton? So a ton, so if you had TNT, dynamite, the stuff from, the Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote blowing people up, that's TNT, dynamite. If you had 2,000 pounds of dynamite, that would be a ton. So when you're talking about a kiloton, it's 2,000 pounds, so there's a lot of numbers, 1,000 tons of TNT. If you exploded that would be a kiloton. When the Fat Man bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, it was 21 kilotons. Huge. Look, I have a picture of it. That's the bomb going off in an airplane flying overhead. Big, big, big bomb. Then we as mankind got dumber. And what we started doing is said, okay, we did that. Let's see if we can make one bigger. So we did. The Soviets in the 60s detonated another giant bomb called a hydrogen bomb. This is the largest bomb that's been detonated in humanity. And it's called the Tsar Bomba. It means king bomb. The king bomb right there, the Tsar Bomba. Its yield was about 50 megatons. 50 megatons. Oh, Christian, that doesn't sound like that much more. There's 1,000 kilotons in 1 megaton. There's 1,000, let me say it one more time. So there's 1,000 kilotons in 1 megaton, and this was 50 megatons. I have another graphic to explain how much energy that was, how big the boom was. You see the little cute guy right here? Little baby, boom. That's not a little baby. That's Nagasaki. That ended the biggest war in human history, World War II. That's it. That's it right next to Everest. When Nagasaki went off, the explosion was, the mushroom cloud was as big as Everest. These are other bombs that we've detonated since then. There's the Tsar Bomba, the big one, the 50 megaton bomb. That bomb exploded and the mushroom cloud went 180,000 feet into the air, halfway to space. The shock waves went around, they were able to measure, the shock waves went around the world more than 3 times over. That is a big bomb. Big bomb. Now what we're going to do, so we get an idea of the scope of this miracle that Jesus did, what happens if we convert megatons to joules so we can understand how much energy is involved there? All right, so we've got the Tsar Bomba, the 50 megaton bomb, okay? So we have that. Let's convert that to kilotons. So we've got 1,000 kilotons per 1 megaton, okay? And then there's 1 joule per 2.39006. This is the conversion factor, times 10 to the negative 13 kilotons. Okay? Again, this is why you always keep track of your units. Our units cancel out. And what that leaves us here is 2.092 times 10 raised to the 17th joules. Okay? So there you go. Okay, great. There I go. Where am I? That's the energy that Jesus used to do the bread. That's the energy in that. Now they're on the same unit of measurement, those joules. Where are you going with that? If we take that number and divide it by that number, that will tell us how many bombs of energy Jesus had to control to do this miracle. So if we take those two numbers, we take the 2.97 times 10 to the 20th joules divided by 2.092 times 10 to the 17th joules. Okay? Joules cancel out, but that's per bomb. And that'll go up there whenever I do the math, so just trust me. If you don't just trust me, ask the other smart people around you. I say smart people, everybody's smart. Ask the other nerdy people around you. That's probably a better word, right? Ask the other nerdy people around you. So what that equates to is 1,420 SAR bombas. Christians, what does that mean? It means when Jesus did this miracle, and this is why I believe it's recorded in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus literally, and quite literally, put his power on display. He showed the world that he could control the same amount of energy that's in 1,400 hydrogen bombs. Okay? All right. What if it... Hydrogen bombs. Okay, so this sounds like a lot. Let me do a little bit further for you. What if we did this with the Fat Man bomb? Instead of the hydrogen bomb, what if we did it with the Fat Man bomb? This is the same as 3,380,228 Fat Man bombs. The bomb that destroyed Nagasaki. Over 40 square miles of devastation. And actually, I did the math on that too. That is enough nuclear power to destroy all the land on earth 3 times over. That's what Jesus did. That's what Jesus did. Now, why? So, again, Christians, so what? Jesus took bread, and he broke it, and then he broke it, and he kept breaking it, and he kept breaking it, and he kept distributing it, and he kept distributing it, and he kept giving it out. And the only possible way for him to be making more and more bread is if he was using that much energy, that much power. So now, why is it so what? We're going to go back to this one simple thought. Jesus can do it. Jesus can do it. I don't know what your it is. Last week, we all gathered together and we prayed for a wonderful lady in our church, Sunny Heinrich. We prayed for her because she has brain cancer. And we laid hands on her and we prayed for her and we asked Jesus to heal her. Why? Because Jesus can do it. You might be going through hard, incredibly difficult things in your life. You can go to Jesus and Jesus can do it. And you might be thinking, Christian, I've been praying for Jesus can do it. But it's just like the song that we sang earlier. He's always at work. Of course Jesus can do it. And when Jesus kept breaking this bread, there weren't fireworks going off. There weren't bombs going off. There wasn't all of this fanfare. He was just doing the miracle. And all the people knew was that they were getting fed. That they were getting bread. And Jesus was doing this infinitely powerful miracle. And what we need to realize about Jesus, this is why it's in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. No matter what you're going through, Jesus has the power to take care of it. Jesus can do it. He can do it. He has the power. He is the power. This is why in the book of John it says, nothing has been made that wasn't made through him. This is why in the book of Colossians it says all things are held together by him and for him and through him, because Jesus is all powerful. Jesus can do it. Now, whatever it is that you're struggling through or whatever it is that you're trusting God for, you may not see Jesus at work in your life. He may be in the background like he was in this miracle, just breaking the bread. But he's still at work. And he still has the power. If there has ever been any doubt about what Jesus can do, all you have to do is look at this very simple and yet powerful miracle. And people might say, well, Christian, I don't know if I believe it. I don't know if I believe that actually happened. You have 4 eyewitness accounts that have been documented, that have survived. The Bible is the most verifiable ancient text that has ever existed. And we can talk about this and you can argue about it, but it's the most verifiable text that we have. Well, how do you know? Well, Homer's a great example. Everybody read the Odyssey? Yes? No? It's a really good read, right? The oldest copy, we don't have the original, the oldest copy of the Odyssey, of Homer's writings, are 500 years after he wrote them. The Bible, we have stuff written within decades, several copies. The Bible's the most, so what we can trust that what's there is what was written down. And you have these 4 guys who wrote down the same miracle, all from a different perspective, showing us, telling us, revealing to us, giving us the confidence that Jesus can do it. He can do it. That's what this breaking of the bread was all about. He can do it. And you need to be reminding yourself of that every single day. And sometimes it's okay to keep repeating yourself. Jesus can do it. Jesus can do it. He can do it. Because Jesus is the name above all names. Jesus is the King of all kings. Jesus is God. And whatever you struggle through, whatever you have, whatever you're wrestling with, He can do it. He can do it.